Hello again. So I told you there was lots to get through today. Let's just crack into a bit more. We're through the really difficult issues of juveniles and sexual offences. So those are the key points you need to be taking from today. So let me just put myself down there in the corner and just we'll crack on now with adult witnesses in court, because there are occasions where they can be given anonymity in an adult court, so adult witnesses in an adult court. So this is under section 46 of the Youth Justice and Criminal Evidence Act. So we're coming back to the same laws, just different sections of the same laws all the time, so don't get too bamboozled by that. There's only a couple of laws involved. Youth Justice and Criminal Evidence Act 1999 is an important one. So a court under section 46 can order a lifetime anonymity for an adult witness, and this is largely to try and protect people, potentially witnesses who might otherwise not want to give evidence if they think their identity is going to get out there, and if the court feels it's going to improve the quality of their evidence. This was first used back in 2005, and it followed on from a drive-by shooting of two young women in Birmingham. They were killed in this drive-by shooting, and it was the first time where a witness had been allowed to use a pseudonym, basically given anonymity, and was only known as Mark Brown, and he came forward and gave evidence under that pseudonym, so allowed to be anonymous, in order to help convict the people who killed those young women. So again, it's that same old thing about what do we mean by an anonymity? Well, we mean we don't give their name, we don't give their address, educational establishment, workplace, or a still or moving image. Again, somebody can waive the court's ban, so the court can ban identity, but if that person wants to waive that, they can provide written consent. So naturally they're an adult, so they're allowed to provide consent, but they have to do it in writing. And so just keep this in mind. Anytime you ask someone to waive a right to anonymity, get it in writing. If you don't get it in writing, you can end up in real trouble, because you don't know. Someone's going to turn around to you and say, well, I never said that, or I misunderstood. And when you get it in writing, you shouldn't just say, I waive my right to anonymity. That waiver also needs to say, I understand that I have a right to lifelong anonymity. However, I am willing to waive this consent. I understand I don't have to do this. You need to show that they're making an informed decision in what they're doing. So the next point is teachers. Interestingly, teachers also potentially get anonymity. So the Education Act in 2011 provided automatic lifelong anonymity to teachers who had been accused of committing an offence against a pupil at their own school. Now, this was really to offer some protection to teachers against malicious accusations. So if they were accused of doing something against a pupil at their school, they were given anonymity. So you are not allowed to report on that as a reporter until or unless if the teacher is then charged with an offence, which means that there's obviously evidence to back up the allegation, then you are able to name them. If the teacher gives written consent, they may do, because they might want to quash rumours, whatever, you can name them, or if the court lifts the anonymity as well. But just be aware that as soon as if somebody comes to you, if a parent comes to you and says, my child is at this school and their teacher has abused them, until the teacher is being charged with that offence, you can't report on it. So it's an important area of anonymity you need to be aware of. Now, the next topic I wanted to cover is something called jigsaw identification. It's a really important point when we're talking about all of these areas of anonymity, whether we're talking about juveniles. Remember, there's a range of situations where juveniles get anonymity, sexual offences, teachers, adults in adult courts may also get anonymity. So what do we mean by jigsaw identification? You have to be really careful. So it's not just what you publish that matters. You can't just look at your own work and think, well, that's fine, I didn't provide anything which identified the person. You have to look at what else has been published, and you have to look at the combination of everything that's been published by different publishers and see, could that be joined together to add up to that person's identification, which means you need to liaise with other reporters. So if ever you're dealing with an issue concerning sexual offences or juveniles, you need to be aware of and be communicating with other reporters. So here's an example. So if you work for Newspaper One and you report that Joe Bloggs has been charged with the rape of a teenager, so that's fine. So you've named the adult, but what you haven't provided enough information to identify the teenager. So that's safe as a report. If paper two, if they didn't name the man, but they reported that an unnamed man had been charged with the rape of his teenage daughter, by itself, that report would be safe. But once you combine those two reports, that adds up to Joe Bloggs' teenage daughter claims that he raped her, which would identify the daughter, and therefore that would breach her right to lifelong anonymity as a victim of a sexual assault. So as you can see, that's jigsaw identification. You need to make sure you're really careful about that. And in general, you'll have conversations in court when you're dealing with a case, and you'll agree whether they're going to be giving a relationship or whether you're going to be naming the person who's been accused of the crime. In terms of the IPSO Editor's Code, they say that you should always identify the adult and avoid giving the relationship. So don't give the relationship to, which could then lead to the identification of the child. That's what IPSO recommend, that you should not hint at the relationship. However, it is quite often different in practice. In practice, it may be that the relationship is what is the newsworthy element. So it might be in practice you don't name the adult, but you do name the relationship. So that comes down to a news desk decision, an editor's decision. So you should always liaise with your news desk, but also make sure you know what other journalists are planning to do in relation to that case. Ofcom also have a section about jigsaw identification, so make sure you read that in the Ofcom code. So it's saying you must be aware of what other information is already out there, which could lead your report to complete the jigsaw and therefore breach the anonymity of a person involved who has a right to anonymity. In general, it's the person who completes the jigsaw that gets into trouble. So if you're the last one to publish and you provide that last piece of information, then you're the one who's in trouble. A couple of very quick points before we finish for today. So court orders and injunctions, we touched on these when we were talking about contempt of court. So remember section 4.2, these were orders that the court can make. This is a temporary ban on publication. So this is a form of anonymity. A court can temporarily say you mustn't identify this person. Now they might do that for a whole range of reasons, mainly in the interest of justice. They also have the power under section 11 of the Contempt of Court Act to put a permanent ban on something. So that might be in the interest of national security. So a clear case was the case of Jean-Charles Menezes, who was the young man killed in London by the police, who mistook him for a terrorist, and they shot him on a tube train. The officers who shot him, they were given lifelong anonymity under a section 11 order because they were working undercover, and the court was asked to protect their identity, and so they were given that. Injunctions are another important thing. Their injunctions can be used to provide anonymity. We talked in the first week about the super injunction which Ryan Giggs got in order to ban the naming or his identity being revealed in relation to allegations that he had had an affair. And there is an injunction now on Thompson and Venables, Robert Thompson and John Venables, the killers um, of Jamie Bulger, the little boy who was killed on Merseyside. There is an injunction which bans anyone or publishing the new identities Thompson and Venables now have. So that's another way in which anonymity can be applied. And lastly, in terms of anonymity, I've talked to you before about this, about sources, but it's a really important area that both the Editor's Code and the Ofcom Code say that we have a moral duty to protect confidential sources, that we must keep our confidential sources anonymous, we must give them anonymity. And the Ofcom Code says that as well. So, and I think I spoke to you at the time about the case of my former colleague Steve Panter, formerly a lecturer at this university, where he was arrested and refused to provide the identity of his source of a story, in which we named the person who was held responsible for planting the Manchester, or being involved in planting the IRA bomb in Manchester. A long time before the arena bomb, the IRA also bombed the city centre, and Steve got details of the person thought to be responsible, published that, and he was arrested and put under pressure to name his source, but he refused to do it because he had that moral duty to protect his confidential sources. There are other cases where you may choose to provide anonymity, which may not even be a legal responsibility, but you need to consider your ethical responsibility, whether a victim of domestic abuse, whether you should be naming those people. Jurors during trials, that's another time where anonymity is an important issue. And ultimately, just use your discretion and use your decency to decide when it's right to offer anonymity. It shouldn't just be given easily. There should be a good reason to provide anonymity, but there are times when you might choose to provide anonymity in your stories, beyond where you have a legal responsibility to do so for instance, juveniles or victims of sexual assaults. Wow, we got there. Okay, so we've been through a lot of stuff today, a lot of quite difficult things, but well done. Got through that list, so we'll see you at the workshop. Remember, the essay has to be in by 4 p.m. on Friday, March the 19th. That's this Friday coming. The exam is going to be on May the 18th. It's 90 minutes long. It'll be held online, and you'll get your grade and feedback 15 working days later, and you must pass the exam, so worth working for. And the reading for this week for anonymity is chapters 10 and 11 in McNay's, and for the first week back after the Easter break, so that's week 8. If you want to get ahead of it, we're going to be looking at freedom of information. So if you want to read McNay's chapters 30 and 36, that'll get you ready for that first week back after the Easter break. Great. I will see you at the workshop on Thursday. Take care.